Police in Turkey have recovered a Bible thought to be 1,000 years old. The holy book, which was found in the central Turkish city of Tokat, is written in the old Assyriac language.
Imagine holding a Bible that's 2,000 years old. Its pages whisper secrets the world wasn't meant to see. And for centuries, the Catholic Church supposedly locked it away. Claims reveal a shocking truth about Jesus, a story so explosive it could rewrite history. Crowds share it, clicks skyrocket, and suddenly everyone wants to know, what did this Bible actually say? But here's the twist. As thrilling as this tale sounds, the evidence tells a very different story.
So you were talking about what is our oldest manuscript evidence? So this guy is P52. John Ryland's 457.
Today, we're diving in to separate the sensational myth from the real history behind these hidden Gospels. The discovery. The story starts with whispers of discovery. A Bible, hidden for 2,000 years, suddenly surfaces. Some say it was found in Turkey, tucked away in a dusty archive, or smuggled from a forgotten monastery. Others claim it was stolen, almost destroyed, and only saved at the last moment. The legend promises something irresistible, a shocking secret about Jesus that mainstream Christianity has supposedly erased. Enter the Gospel of Barnabas. According to the videos and articles, this ancient text reveals that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Someone else, maybe Judas, took his place, while Jesus survived to live a hidden life. It paints a version of history that contradicts the stories we all grew up knowing. And that's exactly why the myth grabs attention. It dares to challenge the foundations of faith itself. And here's the most insidious part. The claim feels possible. After all, haven't other ancient texts been lost and rediscovered? Haven't scholars found previously unknown fragments of early Christian writings? The brain says, maybe, and before long, curiosity turns into belief. But here's the catch. Every sensational detail in these stories collapses under scrutiny. The manuscripts are rarely authenticated. Dates are vague, often inflated to sound 2,000 years old. Even the Gospel of Barnabas, the supposed centerpiece, contains errors that would have made a first-century scribe cringe. Yet, the myth keeps growing. It becomes a world of intrigue. Secret Bibles, suppressed knowledge, and a shocking secret that could rewrite the story of humanity itself. And that's where we pause, because before we can separate fact from fiction, we need to follow the trail of the story itself back to its origins and see how this modern legend took shape. Tracking the story's origin. Every legend has a beginning, and this one is no different. The 2,000-year-old hidden Bible didn't spring fully formed from antiquity. It emerged in the digital age, slowly building momentum across blogs, YouTube channels, and sensationalist news articles. Tracing its roots is like following footprints in a desert. Some lead nowhere, others point straight to recycled myths and misread manuscripts. The earliest hints appear in scattered online forums and Turkish news clippings from the early 2010s. Small websites claimed a manuscript had been confiscated from smugglers, and suddenly a lost gospel was the talk of the internet. The Gospel of Barnabas, long known in scholarly circles as a medieval text, was suddenly presented as a shocking first-century secret, hidden by the Catholic Church for centuries. Headlines screamed that this discovery rewrote history, though the sources were often vague, anonymous, or untraceable. From there, the story mutated. Each new retelling added drama. One version suggested the Vatican feared exposure and locked the text in a secret archive. Another claimed it had been smuggled across borders and almost destroyed. A third promised that historians who examined it were silenced. It's important to notice the pattern. The same story resurfaces every few years with slight changes. New location, new dramatic escape. Sometimes even new evidence in the form of blurry manuscript photos. Despite the variations, one thing remains constant: the lack of verifiable proof. No peer-reviewed study, no authentic manuscript chain, and no independent scholarly verification ever appears. And yet, the myth continues to grow, fueled by the perfect cocktail: mystery, rebellion against authority, and the irresistible allure of forbidden knowledge. Before people know it, curiosity turns into belief, and belief into conviction. To really understand this story, though, we need to examine its centerpiece, the text everyone claims is ancient and dangerous, the Gospel of Barnabas. Only by understanding this text can we see where myth ends and fact begins. The Gospel of Barnabas. At the heart of the hidden Bible myth lies a single name: the Gospel of Barnabas. It's treated online like an explosive secret, capable of overturning centuries of history. But here's the truth. Historians, textual experts, and biblical scholars all agree it's a medieval creation, not a first-century gospel. The earliest manuscripts we have date to the 16th century in Italian and the 17th century in Spanish. That's more than 1,400 years after the lifetime of Jesus. Far from being an eyewitness account, it's a product of a much later era, reflecting theological ideas, cultural details, and political realities that didn't exist in first-century Palestine. Even casual reading reveals red flags. Geography and politics are off. Towns and offices are described in ways a first-century scribe would never recognize. It mixes medieval European customs with religious practices that wouldn't have existed for centuries. And the theology? Full of anachronisms and, in some cases, ideas that sound more Islamic than Jewish-Christian, centuries before Islam even existed. And here's a critical point that skeptics often miss. The Gospel of Barnabas never appears in early Christian writings. The Church Fathers catalogued nearly every known text, those they accepted, those they debated, and those they rejected. Not a single reference to Barnabas shows up. If it were truly a dangerous secret, why would the early church ignore it entirely? Yet the myth persists, partly because the text itself claims to be ancient. Its author presents it as a first-century document, and that small kernel of authenticity convinces casual readers. Throw in blurry images of manuscript pages, dramatic music on YouTube, and ominous voiceovers, and suddenly it feels real. Scholars, however, aren't fooled. Linguists analyze the language, historians examine the context, and theologians study the content, and all point to the same conclusion: medieval origin, not a hidden relic of the first century. It is a pseudepigraph, a text written under a false name designed to persuade or entertain rather than preserve factual history. Understanding this is key. The Gospel of Barnabas might make a sensational story, but it is not evidence of a hidden truth about Jesus. It's a window into later religious imagination, a fascinating text in its own right, but nothing like the explosive secret gospel claimed online. Next, we'll look at why stories like this grip us so tightly, and why the myth refuses to die, no matter how thin the evidence. Why the myth persists. It's easy to shrug off the 2,000-year-old hidden Bible as just another online hoax. But if it were that simple, it wouldn't keep coming back, louder and more dramatic each year. So why does it persist? The answer lies in psychology, culture, and a little bit of digital magic. First, there's the allure of forbidden knowledge. Humans are wired to notice secrets, especially ones that challenge authority. The idea that the Catholic Church, a centuries-old institution with centuries of influence, might be hiding the truth about Jesus is irresistible. It's a story that taps into curiosity, suspicion, and that tiny thrill of rebellion. Then there's emotional resonance. The myth speaks to people on a deeply personal level. What if everything I was taught is wrong? It promises empowerment, a secret only the curious or brave can uncover. Add to that the repetition across countless blogs, forums, and videos, and suddenly the story feels familiar, and familiarity often masquerades as truth. Finally, there's the story's flexibility. Each retelling can tweak details, add new drama, or reference unverified experts to keep it alive. Smuggled manuscripts, hidden Vatican archives, anonymous scholars, every version feels slightly different, keeping the story fresh and shareable. All these factors combine into a perfect storm, a story that's exciting, mysterious, and emotionally charged. Even when evidence is thin or non-existent, the myth survives because it doesn't rely on proof. It relies on human fascination. But fascination isn't history. To separate the thrill from the truth, we need to examine the real treasures of early Christianity, the texts that actually exist, their context, and what they tell us about the world of Jesus and his followers. That's where the story gets even more interesting, because real history, even without conspiracies, can be far more compelling than fiction. Early Christian text. Amid the drama of hidden Bibles and viral claims, the real story of early Christian texts is far more fascinating, and backed by evidence you can hold in your hands. Take Papyrus 52, for instance. This tiny fragment, barely larger than a business card, contains a few verses from the Gospel of John. Dated to around 125 to 150 CE, it is the oldest known manuscript of any New Testament text. Even in its small size, P52 proves that John's Gospel was circulating decades after Jesus' death, long before any modern claims of suppressed secrets. Contrast that with the Gospel of Barnabas, which some online stories cite as the hidden Bible. Barnabas is a 16th to 17th century manuscript filled with historical inaccuracies and anachronisms. It wasn't written in the 1st century, it never circulated among early Christian communities, and it shows no trace in any church records. Barnabas is essentially a medieval creation, a text that fuels myths, not history. But the story gets richer when we look at other early Christian writings. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, emerged between roughly 70 CE and 100 CE, drawing on oral traditions and early community memories. Non-canonical texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, early 2nd century, Gospel of Peter, 2nd century, Gospel of Mary, 3rd century, and Gospel of Judas, 2nd century, reveal vibrant debates among early believers. They wrestled with authority, interpretation, and theology, exploring questions that remain compelling even today. These texts were copied, discussed, and sometimes hidden in fragile conditions, but never systematically suppressed by a central authority. Papyrus 52 sits in the middle of this landscape as a concrete artifact, proving that early Gospels were being read and transmitted. Unlike the blurry images of Barnabas presented online, P52 is verifiable, studied by scholars worldwide, and preserved in the John Rylands Library in Manchester. It's a reminder that history doesn't need sensationalism to be dramatic. A small piece of papyrus tells a story far more compelling than any viral claim. The lesson is clear. While myths like the hidden Bible captivate imaginations, the truth of early Christianity is richer, more complex, and entirely fascinating on its own. Manuscripts like P52, combined with canonical and non-canonical texts, show a world of devotion, debate, and careful preservation, a world where the Gospels survived not through secrecy, but through the dedication of communities who wanted the story to endure. In short, the thrill isn't in conspiracies or hidden secrets, it's in the survival of real texts, the meticulous care of early Christians, and the tantalizing glimpses we get into their faith, creativity, and determination across centuries. The historical context of Jesus and the canonical Gospel. To really understand why the hidden Bible myths fall apart, we need to step back into the world of 1st century Palestine, the world Jesus actually lived in. It's a world of dusty roads, Roman occupation, and diverse Jewish communities, each with their own interpretations of faith and law. This context is critical because the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, didn't emerge in isolation. They were written decades after Jesus' death, shaped by memory, oral traditions, and the urgent desire to preserve the story of a man who had changed everything. Mark, generally considered the earliest gospel, appears around 70 CE, roughly 40 years after the crucifixion. Its narratives are concise, sometimes raw, reflecting eyewitness traditions and oral stories circulating in small communities. Matthew and Luke, written shortly after, expand these accounts, adding genealogy, sermons, and contextual details to make sense of Jesus' life for a broader audience. John, coming later, offers a more theological and reflective perspective, emphasizing divinity and cosmic significance. Together, these texts create a layered, multifaceted picture, not a single secret narrative waiting to be revealed. Meanwhile, non-canonical texts, like Thomas, Peter, or Mary, provide glimpses of alternative theological reflections. They show early Christians debating questions of authority, resurrection, and moral teaching, not hiding conspiracies. These texts are valuable precisely because they demonstrate that the early movement was intellectually and spiritually diverse. They survived in fragments, often hidden in caves or buried by communities under threat, but their existence was never a secret intended to undermine the church. Roman and Jewish historical sources provide further grounding. Tacitus, Josephus, and other historians reference Jesus and the early Christian movement, confirming his execution under Pontius Pilate and the growth of his followers. These accounts, while brief and sometimes contested, reinforce the core narrative of Jesus' life and death. There is no historical evidence of a grand conspiracy to suppress an alternative gospel that radically rewrites the story. The canonical Gospels, then, are products of careful transmission, reflection, and debate. They are reinforced by manuscript evidence from early Christian communities across the Roman Empire, showing a transparent process of preservation rather than concealment. The hidden Bible stories often ignore this robust historical record, replacing centuries of scholarship with vague claims, blurry photos, and dramatic voiceovers. Understanding this context is empowering. It shows that early Christianity was a living, complex movement, full of discussion, interpretation, and evolving theology. The canonical Gospels reflect this richness, and the non-canonical texts illuminate the creativity and debate of early believers. Sensational secret gospel claims may thrill online audiences, but they cannot compete with the fascinating, authentic story of a man whose life and teachings inspired a world-changing movement. Comparison between the myth and reality. Now that we've explored the myth, traced its origins, and examined both the Gospel of Barnabas and the real early Christian texts, it's time to step back and evaluate the story we've been fed versus the story historians actually recognize. On one side sits a narrative that feels made for streaming, a 2,000-year-old Bible hidden away by the Catholic Church, containing a revelation about Jesus so explosive it had to be suppressed. It's the sort of premise that could launch a viral post, a documentary teaser, or a breathless podcast episode. It has tension, mystery, high stakes, everything that hooks an audience. On the other side is something less flashy but far more substantial: evidence, manuscripts, archaeology, textual criticism, and over a century of scholarly research. This side of the story doesn't rely on shadowy archives or hidden vaults. It relies on real objects, real documents, and real history, a landscape that is rich, complex, and, when you look closely, more intriguing than any modern myth. The myth thrives because it's rooted in the idea of secrecy and suppression. It assumes that institutions with power would naturally hide dangerous truths. It imagines a world in which knowledge could be controlled for centuries without fracture, leak, or counter-tradition. That's why the Gospel of Barnabas sits at the heart of this myth. According to viral claims, this is the Forbidden Book, the manuscript supposedly found in Turkey in the 2010s, the one whispered to reveal a version of Jesus the Church didn't want the world to know about. But once we examine the facts, the myth collapses quickly. The Gospel of Barnabas is not an ancient document. It is not a lost 1st century gospel. Its earliest manuscripts appear in the 16th and 17th centuries, more than 1400 years after Jesus lived. The text contains anachronisms, references to medieval social structures, geographical mistakes, and theological ideas that didn't exist in the 1st century. It also mirrors aspects of later religious polemics, making it impossible to see it as an authentic apostolic work. Even more telling, the text leaves no trace in the writings of early Christian theologians, bishops, historians, or heresiologists. If the Church had actively suppressed it, as the myth suggests, some record of its existence, even a condemnation, should appear somewhere. It doesn't. For over a millennium, the Gospel of Barnabas simply does not exist in any historical stream. Now compare that with the genuine early Christian texts. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, emerged within the 1st century, written within decades of Jesus' death. These weren't hidden or controlled by a single institution. They were copied, shared, preached, debated, and translated across regions. They circulated widely in communities that did not agree on everything. If any organization had attempted to suppress alternative narratives, the sheer number of manuscripts and the diversity of early Christian groups would have made that impossible. Then there are the non-canonical texts, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Peter, the infancy Gospel of James, and others. These writings show us that early Christianity was intellectually vibrant and beautifully diverse. Some communities learned philosophy, some mystical, some are hierarchical, some are deeply egalitarian. These texts weren't hidden, they were part of the debate. They survived because people found meaning in them, not because institutions wanted them erased. And when discoveries like the Nag Hammadi Library surfaced in the 20th century, scholars didn't panic, they celebrated. The academic world thrives on new findings, not suppressing them. The persistence of the hidden Bible myth reveals less about history and more about human psychology. People are drawn to the idea of forbidden knowledge. There's something irresistible about believing you've uncovered a secret everyone else missed. Suspicion of institutions, combined with the viral power of social media, fuels narratives that feel urgent and rebellious. In an age where digital platforms prioritize engagement, not accuracy, myths spread faster than facts. A dramatic headline will always outrun a nuanced explanation until someone slows down and asks the right questions. Ultimately, the comparison is stark. The sensational story of a suppressed 2,000-year-old Bible is a modern legend built on fragile evidence and a misunderstood medieval text. It survives because it is exciting, not because it is true. Meanwhile, the real history of early Christianity is far richer and more surprising. It reveals communities arguing, evolving, questioning, imagining, a movement shaped by diversity rather than secrecy. It shows how texts were written, copied, and preserved with astonishing care, even in times of persecution and chaos. And perhaps the most important takeaway is this: you don't need conspiracies or shadowy vaults to find a compelling narrative. The truth is already compelling. The survival of manuscripts across deserts, monasteries, caves, and empires, the resilience of communities determined to preserve their memory, is a story more emotionally powerful and intellectually satisfying than any clickbait headline. Understanding what is authentic and why myths persist sharpens our ability to think critically. It helps us appreciate the courage, creativity, and humanity of people who lived 2,000 years ago. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and click on the next video shown on your screen.